One person keeps chasing for connection, the other keeps pulling away for space. One feels abandoned, the other feels suffocated, and eventually both people start asking the same question: why does loving each other feel this hard? Most people think this is a compatibility problem, but a lot of the time, it's actually a regulation problem. Two nervous systems speaking completely different languages of survival. That's the part people miss. Because in push pull relationships, both people are usually trying to feel safe. They just move in opposite directions to get there. The push strategy usually looks obvious first: more texting, more checking in, more reassurance seeking, more emotional urgency, and from the outside, people label it clingy. But internally, the experience feels very different. For the anxious person, distance does not feel neutral. It feels dangerous. Silence feels emotionally loud. A delayed response feels emotionally significant. A shift in energy feels like the beginning of abandonment. Not because they're dramatic, because their nervous system learned to associate inconsistency with emotional threat. So, when connection starts feeling unstable, they move closer. Not because they want control, because they're trying to find safety again. They're looking for an anchor so their body can relax. That's important to understand because most anxious behavior is not actually about attention, it's about regulation. But then there's the other side: the pull, the withdrawal, the silence, the shutting down, the sudden need for space. And this side gets misunderstood constantly too, because from the outside, it can look cold, detached, uncaring. But internally, many avoidant people are not experiencing "I don't care." They're experiencing "I'm overwhelmed." For the anxious partner, silence feels like a scream. But for the avoidant partner, a request for connection can feel like an interrogation. One is starving for a word, the other is suffocating under the weight of them. For many avoidant people, intense emotional demand starts feeling psychologically consuming, like they are losing access to themselves inside the relationship, which is why many avoidant people instinctively regulate through distance, through silence, through task focus, through physically leaving the room. Not because they're trying to punish the other person, because their nervous system is trying to contain emotional overload. For a lot of avoidant people, closeness stops feeling safe the moment it starts feeling emotionally consuming. That's why they retreat into what feels like a cocoon. Space becomes regulation, and this is where the trap begins. It becomes a psychological seesaw. The harder one person slams down for connection, the higher the other person flies up for air. Neither person feels grounded because the movement of one is constantly destabilizing the other. Because the more the anxious person chases for safety, the more the avoidant person withdraws for safety. And the more the avoidant person withdraws, the more the anxious person panics and pursues. Both people are trying to regulate, but their strategies are perfectly designed to trigger the other person's deepest fear. The anxious partner fears abandonment. The avoidant partner fears engulfment. So the anxious person moves closer. The avoidant person moves farther away. And eventually, both people end up experiencing exactly what they fear most. One feels abandoned, the other feels controlled. That's the paradox of the push pull dynamic. Neither person feels emotionally safe, even though both people are usually trying very hard to create safety. That's why these relationships can become emotionally exhausting while still feeling intensely attached. The cycle itself becomes addictive because the makeup after the conflict creates an enormous dopamine spike. Your brain starts confusing the relief of ending a survival threat with the joy of intimacy. You are not just attached to the person anymore, you become attached to the chemical relief of the war finally ending. That cycle traps people for years. And honestly, many couples spend years fighting the behavior without understanding the nervous system underneath it. That's why the shift usually begins when both people stop asking, "Why are you doing this to me?" and start asking, "What is your nervous system trying to protect right now?" That question changes everything, because now the behavior stops looking malicious and starts looking adaptive. For the anxious partner, healing often starts with learning the pause. Learning that temporary distance is not always rejection. Learning how to regulate fear before immediately pursuing reassurance, not suppressing emotion, just slowing the reaction long enough to see reality clearly again. And for the avoidant partner, healing often starts with learning the bridge. Small reassurance, small communication, something as simple as, "I'm overwhelmed right now. I need 20 minutes, but I'm not leaving you." That sentence can completely change the emotional outcome of a conflict, because now space no longer feels like disappearance. It feels temporary, predictable, safe. That's the part many avoidant people underestimate. A little reassurance prevents a massive chase, and a little patience prevents a massive shutdown. That's how co regulation starts replacing mutual triggering. And honestly, the healthiest relationships are not the ones where nobody ever gets activated emotionally. That's unrealistic. The healthiest relationships are the ones where both people eventually learn how to find each other again after activation happens, where space is not abandonment, and closeness is not imprisonment, where both people slowly stop treating each other like the enemy and start treating the nervous system responses as the thing they're navigating together. That creates a completely different relationship because now the goal is not winning the conflict. The goal is protecting the connection while both people regulate safely. And that's a much more mature form of love because a relationship is not a destination you reach and stay at. It's a path you constantly lose and find again together. The strongest relationships are not the ones where nobody pulls away. They're the ones where everyone knows how to find their way back. Are you usually the one who pushes for connection or the one who pulls for space? And how has understanding your partner's why changed the way you react? Let's talk about it in the comments.